Greetings. Thank you very much. Peter Nyeko from Mandulis Energy. I'm a director at Mandulis Energy. We're developing both grid-connected and off-grid power generation projects. We've got a couple of mini-grids up in northern Uganda, in Noye district, biomass for one, and biomass and solar and hybrid for the other, developing a few others in biogas as well, and also doing a 20 megawatt power plant being developed in Gulu. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Greetings. My name is Dr. Brian Isavire. I'm the Commissioner for the Department of Renewable Energy at the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Development, Uganda. I'm glad to be here and to be part of this great panel and, of course, audience discussing matters that touch on areas of interest to the ministry and particularly the renewable energy sector. Thank you.
Geoffrey Okoboy. I work as a director, economic regulation at the Electricity Regulatory Authority. I'm representing my Chief Executive Officer, Engineer Ziria Ivalwa Wako, where I was said I was the acting CEO. Thank you.
Claire Komhendo. I work with the United Nations Capital Development Fund. I support a portfolio of energy service companies. A couple of them are downstairs in the deal room. Happy to be here.
Edison Bacha, Managing Director of Finding XY, also Program Lead for the Uganda Green Enterprise Finance Accelerator, a program that is running across the country to finance what we call green SMEs and also to build the capacity of commercial banks to increase their lending in green finance.
Thank you, everybody on this panel. I'll start with you, Dr. Isabire, and straight to the government policy direction for the off-grid sector. We've seen a lot of changes in the last couple of years, but we've also seen the ministry embrace off-grid electricity. What plans as government do you have for the off-grid sector, especially in the next 5 years?
Yeah, thank you very much. As the previous panel mentioned, and my Minister of State for Energy, this sector of off-grid is very important, up to 38% of the access in the country. And looking at within the strategic fit, we know that the National Development Plan 3 highlights this as an area and has plans for up to or slightly beyond 200 mini-grids to be set up in this country. The response of the ministry in terms of development of this sector is hinged on what currently the sector looks like. We know that within this sector, we have inconsistent component standards, and in most of the places, we find faulty installations because of poor or limited access to standardized technologies. So within this sector, we are looking at coming up with a strategy for technology transfer such that we have technologies. The sector is also associated with limited capacity, particularly for O&M, in terms of human and institution. In terms of policy, again, the sector has lacks a strong regulatory framework, particularly for guiding private sector and investments that are geared into this sector. So mostly what we are seeing is that the risks within this sector, and there is no provision for ensuring that investors have that confidence to invest in the sector. So the government has come up with strategies, some of which are highlighted within the policies, particularly the revised policy, energy policy for the country, in the draft form of 2019. So the government has come up with about 5 strategies One is to ensure that the sector follows an up-to-date master plan for investment within this sector, and these are areas that the government, through the Ministry of Energy, taking on making sure that we have a master plan for investment in this particular sector. The government also plans to come up with innovative subsidies to make sure that there are connections, particularly for the low voltage networks. The government is also planning and has put in place initiatives that are geared at coming up with supportive mechanisms, particularly those mechanisms that don't distort the market, coming up with incentives and subsidies that would ensure that the markets are not distorted, but enhance investment in the sector. We are also discussing innovative financing mechanisms, and I'm glad to know that the discussions in the deal room down are speaking to this initiative that the government is spearheading. We want to come up with financing mechanisms that would enhance investment in the area. But the panel before, and of course the discussions that have gone before, have hinged around increasing productive use of energy in this country. We think productive use will create the right market pool for adoption of these technologies. So government is moving beyond just domestic use of power within the rural setup and of course other trading centers to enhance a use of this power for increasing income at the household. So those are some of the strategies. But in terms of the policy plans that we have and which are highlighted in number of policy and plans that the ministry has, we have plans within the energy policy to strengthen the legal, regulatory, and commercial frameworks, particularly for the mini-grids and other off-grid applications. As the ministry and our partners, we are coming up with the tariff policy. We want to come to make sure that we have subsidies that would enhance interest in investment in this area. We also want to come up with technical specifications, quality of service specifications, and to make sure that consumer protection is at the forefront. So at the policy level, those are plans that are within our strategies going forward. But you know, one of the challenges is the challenge of attracting good investors to this sector. Because when you have one mini grid, then you will not be able to attract competent investors in this area. So the government plans to come up with approaches for bundling mini grid tenders to increase the economies of scale and make sure that we optimize the tariffs, which is one of the biggest challenges in accessing this power. As I already suggested or alluded to, financing mechanisms are being discussed, and we think that there should be options for us to have financing that allows consumers and developers to access affordable finances for them to invest in the sector. The tariff setting has been a challenge, and this is one of the things that is affecting the adoption of these technologies and innovations. So the ministry and partners are developing tariff setting methods for the mini grids to ensure that there is access through this facility, which also gives income or return to the investors. One of the presenters in the last panel mentioned data. We want to make sure that there is data because for the investors to access affordable loans, you need to have market information. So we are looking at promoting or putting in place initiatives that would provide market data and ensure that there are feasibility studies that would encourage investment in the sector. And lastly, I have already mentioned, I just want to emphasize that incentives regime, building capacity, and making sure that there is efficiency in the sector are some of the plans that the ministry and the government of Uganda are pursuing. I thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Isabire, for that very comprehensive response, which sets the stage for our next question to the Acting Director, ERA, Mr. Geoffrey. Mr. Isabire here just talked of the legal regulatory framework for the sector and especially the tariff policy. there has been a general feeling in the off-grid sector that ERA is somewhat not adjusting to off-grid. And this is something we keep, when we interact with off-grid companies, especially mini-grids, they feel like you regulate mini-grids the way you would regulate umeme, the way you regulate ESCOM, which are totally different companies. What do you have to say about that, and what are you doing about it?
Thank you very much, moderator. First of all, I would like to thank my colleague from the ministry. He has touched on a number of issues that now for me, I can now give actual facts. One is that as a regulator, the authority balances the interests of three major players: the government, the consumer, and the developers. Now, these three have different and diverging interests. The consumer wants a low tariff. The developer wants high profits or high returns. The government wants to balance socio-economic development in the area. Now, for you to be able to do that, you need to look critically at what needs to be done to bring into harmony these three diverging patterns. So to do that, we have to consider the two important things that we regulate. First is the price. Second is the technical aspects. There is the third issue of safety. So once you have all this, then you need to look at what do you need to do to promote this emerging and important area. So what have we done? What you said that there seems to be this tension. One is that we have a regulation of 2020 that is called the Electricity Isolated Grid Systems Regulation 2020. Now, this is a regulation which is light-handed. It gives clear guidelines on how developers can come into this industry. We have gone ahead, we have even established now what we call a subsidy framework that he talked about. For me, I give facts. We have now a subsidy framework. We have been looking at our country and our consumers. Remember, poverty in the country still is high. In northern Uganda, the poverty rate is still at 25%. What does that mean? By the poverty line, it means that a person can spend up to 3,500 shillings per day. So how many people can spend that per day? Found that from the government statistics, you see that you have up to 25% of the population cannot spend 3,500. Now we have the mini-grid developers asking for a tariff of 70 cents. That is US cents. That is equivalent to 6,500. Now, if you cannot be able to spend 3,500 per day, can you be able to purchase power at 6,500? So you need to strike that balance. So we looked at it, and given the circumstances, we had a quasi framework, which we said, let the maximum ceiling be at 30%, at 30 cents. Then we can attract those who can now get the development support within that range. And indeed, we have many. Mondolis is one of them here, he's talking about, but we now have a list of over 9, almost 10 mini-grids. He talked about bundling them. We have bundled mini grids which we have licensed in northern Uganda. They are 25 mini grids bundled for one company. We have 15 mini grids in southwestern Uganda bundled together. Now, some of these developers, with all the support from development partners, they are asking for 52 cents as the maximum ceiling they can take in order for them to develop these mini grids. Even that is not in the capacity of many. In southwestern Uganda, poverty is still at 24%, 20 to 24%, meaning that those people cannot even afford. You can bring them power, but all they can do is just look at it and not use it. So that's why we come up with frameworks to support government policy, to support consumer, and also support the development pattern. There are also other frameworks. As we do a framework for subsidy, we are also looking at making sure that the poor can also get something. So at 250 shillings per unit, that is what we call a lifeline tariff. And all of you here, by the way, benefit from a lifeline tariff. Of the first 15 units, you take them at 250 shillings. So these are the frameworks that we do to ensure that the tariffs are made affordable. I can leave it at that.
Thank you.
But
Thank you,
the
Geoffrey.
key point is what the regulator has done to ensure light-handed regulation, affordable tariffs for these kind of off-grid systems. Thank you.
Thank you, Geoffrey. And I'll now pass the baton to Peter because you pointed at him. Peter, the stage is set for you. He says the government has a framework in place. You need to find that demand. You need to stimulate that demand and create opportunities that make people use your electricity so that you can charge less and not instead oppress the end user. What are you doing? What are some of the initiatives you have put in place to stimulate this demand and keep your tariff as low as possible?
Awesome. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you, sir. Yeah, so we are grateful to be a Ugandan company that's developing mini grids in Uganda. And we're also grateful to be in a place where we actually care first and foremost about socioeconomic development. And as a result of that, we have to make sure when we go to ERA, we ask for a tariff that is way below their target of 30 cents. So we actually go below that by a significant amount. And then thirdly, we then look for the right investors whose profit expectations match with our socioeconomic development focus. So that's kind of what we're all about. And it does work. We've been successful, and we're glad to still be around and to be growing. What makes it interesting from our point of view is, if I'm living here in Kampala, which I do, and if I'm paying, the Umeme rate, and if I'm earning above 1 million shillings a month, someone who's earning 10 times less should not be forced to pay 3 times more for their electricity. So from a fairness point of view, that drives us, but also from an economic point of view, if we think of the rural areas where production goes, in Uganda's national anthem, we sing about "by sun on fertile soil grown." So agriculture is so important. But if someone is in the rural area and they have to do pre-processing of their maize before they sell it on to a big player, they've got to process immediately after harvest to help reduce impurities going up. And if they do their processing on the grid, process on the grid pay sometimes so little. But the same process from the rural area has to pay 70 cents, 50 cents, even 30 cents. It's so much higher than the 13 cents that has to be paid in the city. So what we're really inspired to do is to say, great, what do we need to do to improve our technology and improve our investor mix to make sure even at an off-grid level, we could relate with the MEMD and ERA and figure out a way to bring our tariff for rural households be the same as the tariff for urban households, and bring the tariff for rural industry to be the same as the tariff for urban industry. If we can do that, then I'm sure we can help realize what His Excellency the President talks about all the time when he talks about industrialization and bringing the tariffs down. Because if you bring down the cost of processing for a farmer, wherever they may be, all the way in Isinjiro, they can make sure they process their crop to a level where Coca-Cola can actually buy it. And why should they pay 3 times more to process, while here in Kawempe we'll probably pay, only 13 cents. So that really made us realize that if we focus on anchor loads that are focused on agriculture processing, we can make sure our electricity is being used around the clock, and we can bring down the average levelized cost of electricity. So technology-wise, blending biomass, either gasification or biogas with solar, with some battery storage, going for a hybrid system, and involving things like electric vehicle transportation and so on and so forth to make sure the ecosystem is always busy. Then, while only looking at household connections would have meant 6 hours a day of production, now we can have production 24 hours a day, usage 24 hours a day, and we can keep going lower and lower and lower. Secondly, having bigger mini grids, which are close to the 500 kilowatts, which our government has allowed us to go up to for selling to others. At 500 kilowatts, you can get the economies of scale, which are close enough to a grid-connected project. And you can bring those tariffs down to make sure an industry at 13.3 cents a kilowatt hour can actually use that electricity. So that's how we've realized it makes sense. But beyond that, we've said energy is not just electricity. We've heard earlier from Honorable Minister about cooking fuel. So by using technologies that give us cooking fuel as a residue, biogas to electricity, you get excess biogas that can be packaged as cooking fuel. Gasification, you can get excess biochar that can be cooking fuel. Those help us have our own inbuilt subsidy mechanism within the project, but also help the community reduce the cost of cooking fuel and access to it. So it's been quite exciting from that point of view. The only downside is, since we're a small Ugandan company, we don't usually qualify when people look at big investors, but we are growing, and I think we'll get there. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter. And now over to Eddie from UGEFA. Eddie, Peter mentions that Ugandan companies have to carefully match their investment. They have to look for the right investor, the right bank, before they go out to invest, because it's highly likely they won't meet the targets for ERA and Ministry of Energy. How is your program overcoming that, especially the complaint that there's not enough cheap financing or patient capital in the sector to keep companies afloat?
Thank you so much, Joyce, and thank you for everyone, ERA and the ministry, for the comments you provided, and thank you to Ash from BAGFA also laying the ground for the issue of financing in the energy space. The Uganda Green Enterprise Finance Accelerator is a facility that is providing discounted loans to what we call green SMEs. One of the sectors that we are looking at is of course renewable energy. The notion to pursue more distributed renewable energy is quite very relevant. Uganda's electricity consumption, 70% goes to the manufacturers and the industry, and less for the households, which consists less than 20%. So that only highlights the importance of supporting MSMEs in how they can put across more projects to supply energy. What needs to be done is to find more concessional ways, like has been mentioned by the ministry, to finance such enterprises. Of course, if you ask any enterprise what is their biggest need, they will tell you it's finance. But of course, our research and like the BAGFA reports will also show is that there is a skills gap in from among these SMEs. So these two go hand in hand. They need to develop their skills. Most of the Ugandan companies are well acquainted with doing the smaller home systems, supplying some of these appliances. But when it comes to the bigger project, there is a very huge skills gap on how to design and implement some of these, for example, captive PV projects. And that is where most of the manufacturers are, that is where most of the industries are, and that is where we need now to go, even when you talk about energy for productive use. So in UGEFA, what we are doing is that we are blending technical assistance, training the companies first, mainly on issues to do with financial management, investment, and how they are managing their operations before we introduce them to partner banks. In 2020, we did a scoping exercise with different commercial banks, and that is why we leveraged this program to work mainly through banks. And we discovered a number of things that are preventing energy companies from accessing loans from the commercial banks. And one of those was the issue of high cost of lending, issue of collateral, the issue of commercial banks not understanding renewable energy businesses. So what we decided to do was to design this facility, use the grant with financing from the EU to discount loans that can come from the commercial banks. And this is going quite well because there was a negative perception around these companies accepting loans from commercial banks. But it has been quite the positive side where we have received many expressions of interest and applications for companies that are interested in this. So businesses are not afraid of receiving more commercial finance. So the notion of blending development finance with commercial finance is key for us. How can we keep the SMEs and develop their capacity to work from within the ecosystem, the existing financing ecosystem, and enable them to be more competitive? That is why it's important for us to blend these two, access to finance and the need for capacity development. Of course, there are different financing models that have to be considered. The issue of equity investment. But even when you're going to make equity investments or you want to do it through capital markets, you have to see to it that these companies that we are targeting, especially the domestic companies, because they have to compete with the international companies, that they have to improve on their ability to raise this financing, their governance levels, how are they governed, how are they operating, is it a one-man show or is it a well-structured business that can inspire investor confidence? So these are some of the aspects that we are looking at and we think that are very important for local companies to access finance. And of course, the ecosystem, we ourselves included different development partners and investors, the commercial banks that we are working with to build the capacity to attract more green finance and design more products that can support these companies are all important to design these financing mechanisms that can support the companies, the energy companies in Uganda.
Thank you, Eddie. Very comprehensive responses there. And to now take me to Claire, who has done some similar work with UNCDF. Claire, it almost seems to me that UGEFA is following hot on the heels of UNCDF A couple of years back, UNCDF was a champion of the off-grid sector, doing a lot of work in capacity building for off-grid solar companies, especially local ones. How did that go, and what lessons did you learn from that program that could maybe inform where we are today?
Thank you. UNCDF, just like you mentioned, does similar work a little bit to what Eddie's just spoken about. One of the biggest for the existence of the Development Fund is to unlock public and private financing. Sorry about that. The biggest role that UNCDF is playing here is to unlock public and private financing for these companies. And I'll point out a few issues that you did mention, Peter. Companies are available. There are actually many projects, the entrepreneurs working out different ways to nurture their companies to be able to provide the energy across the country. Now, one of the things that the UNCDF has actually realized is how to get these companies move from one place to the next in terms of growth and scale, and especially to get to the level of distribution to the last mile. Now, how has UNCDF done that? Through partnerships. We have partnered with the Ministry of Energy. We have partnered with USAID projects in offering tailored financing solutions to these companies through loans and guarantees. We've partnered with the UNCDF to be able to provide concessional debt, just like the previous speaker said. Additionally, there is an in-house loan facility called the Lease Development Capital Investment Platform, the LDCIP. So given that these opportunities are there, what has UNCDF done for the projects that we have in-house? After realizing that most of them are, growth stage companies and probably not yet attractive for commercial financing, some have been nurtured through grant financing, and these grants have supported them in tailoring their most of the innovations are technology. Some of the innovations have also been on distribution mechanisms, how to reach the last mile, and also basically how to cover some of the things that Eddie did mention, the challenges of governance and all these to get the companies ready. So we have nurtured companies from growth stage, moving on to the ability to borrow from commercial banks, the ability to tap into the in-house funding options, and some of them have actually successfully been able to attract private equity financing. Last year, we had one of the productive energy use companies grow from a simple lending of 150,000, now borrowing over 1.5 billion. So these are the success stories. And when it comes to the off-grid sector, we've had some lessons that we learned from, having a mini grid set up on one of the islands. This has been quite a learning process to show that some of the growing companies have the ability to structure, to actually borrow, also support the community. Because if I give an example of that was set up at the island, 3 things happened. In the end, there were companies that Thank you. Of mask, I don't know whether it's causing the problems. The success story for the mini grid setup is this company started small, and just like Eddie explained, companies are not yet investment ready in terms of getting into the commercial bank and coming out with a loan. Some investment funds are looking for, companies that are already profitable. How has UNCDF supported, or how did UNCDF support this particular case? Through the grant on innovation, did manage to go out there onto the island, using the data that was available, set up the mini grid from a bit of this grant funding, got into the fishermen, mobilization of the fishermen to be able to borrow through SACCOs, and eventually with the setup of the mini grid, they were able to produce ice flakes so they can, keep their fish safe and bring it ashore. So that's just a success story. So lessons learned through these interventions is that we need partnerships. We need to utilize the process of growing enterprises to get them to be investor ready. I'll stop there for now.
Thank you, Claire. And now the MC tells me we have 2 minutes, but may I request for 5, Madam Catherine? 5, please. I have a last question for Ash. Ash, 2 minutes. Ash, are you still online? Is Ash still online? Not online anymore. Okay. So if Ash is no longer online, I'd like to request the panelists each to give me, in less than 10 words, what do you think is that magic bullet for you, for the off-grid sector, to get the off-grid sector moving? That silver bullet. Over to you, Peter.
Renewable energy to power agriculture and rural livelihoods enhancement.
We must have the right technologies. We must build the right capacities. Make sure that we have an enabling policy, institution, and market setup. And make sure that we have the right data, information, and knowledge for investment and for advocacy.
Thank you, very many of them. Mondulis is here. What we are waiting for him is to really power and bring the energy onto the market. We expect him in 2022. So he should do his work. We have done our work. We have already reduced the regulatory hurdles. They are so easy. You can come in and invest in this country in the area of renewable energy. So long as we have clarity that a given area can still support the renewable energy using a mini grid framework.
Thank you, Geoffrey.
Thank you.